So our next speaker is Miss Sally Lago, who is a Master's of Science biomathematics student at Strathmore University in Kenya. She will be presenting on Can Mathematics Bridge the Divide in Nyanza's Fight Against HIV, a mathematical model of the effect of culture HIV transmission dynamics.
Good afternoon, if I can say that. So yes, what I'm about to present to you is a mathematical model on the effect of cultural practices on HIV transmission dynamics in the Luo Nyanza region, which is a region in Kenya that has risky predisposing cultural practices. This is an ongoing thesis work being supervised by Professor Rachel Mbogo and Dr. Titus Orwa. Yes. So the question will be, or is, why HIV? A lot of work has been done around HIV, and we still keep on doing and proposing a lot of research around HIV. So why is this the case? So as we look at HIV, it's still pressing global health challenges, and sub-Saharan Africa still bears a very big burden of the disease. And Kenya is one of the countries that still grapples with the same transmission, new infections, and continues every time from time to time. And when we look at the Kenyan region, when you look at the map, there are regions that are having the predominant spread of the disease, and the Luo Nyanza region happens to be one of them. So when we look at, when you look at the area near the lake, which is in dark red, that represents the Luo Nyanza region. So it has been hypothesized that there are cultural practices that are actually predominant in this region that have been affecting the incidence and prevalence of HIV in this region. And some of it, we have cultural practices such as widow cleansing and wife inheritance, whereby for widow cleansing, we have when a widow is diseased, they are believed to have some perceived uncleanliness that they've gained from the death of their husband. So as a result, they are supposed to be cleansed and inherited. Over time, in the past, this used to be done by family members, but over time, most people have been educated and are moving away from such cultural practices. But we actually have people who have now commercialized this. That means if we have a professional inheritor, that is the person inheriting a widow, that means if they have HIV, they'll be able to spread this to the subsequent widows that they're going to inherit. On the contrary, let's say if the widow's husband died due to HIV. That means this widow will transmit HIV to the inheritor, the professional inheritor. And since this is like work that they are doing, they'll be able to transfer this to multiple widows who are going to be inherited. So this provides a challenge, and a lot of work has been done, but there's little mathematical model that have been done around this area just to quantify what is the effect of these cultural practices on the transmission dynamics in the Luo Nyanza region. So for this research, I aim to, or rather part of what is the goal of the research is to develop and analyze a mathematical model that can actually assess the effect of this transmission of the cultural practices on the transmission dynamics in the Luo Nyanza region. And why is this important? It is important because we cannot fail to acknowledge the fact that we have interventions that have already been put in place, like that the ART coverage in the region, the voluntary male circumcision in the region, but we still seem to be having the region, this Luo Nyanza region, contributing to some of the highest new infections in the region. So what if the biological interventions are not enough? What if it gets us to a place whereby we actually conclude beyond the biological interventions that are actually there, we actually need to add cultural interventions to it? Because as we know, we can't remove culture, especially from our people, and especially in Africa and Kenya, where we have very rich cultural practices that are ongoing. So it is important to understand the context of the region and come up with interventions that can actually work for that particular region. So with this, we have, this is the, I will take you through the, this is the non-parameterized model, which explains how the model will be working. That is from, we have a group of susceptible individuals who get infected, and some of them are put into treatment, while others drop out, others are able to adhere and be virally suppressed. And some of the contributions to actually how one moves from being susceptible to infected, cultural practices play that role. Because when we have the interaction between the people who are HIV negative with those who are positive due to cultural practices, then they're able to move around and become infected. So this explains a similar thing that we had from the model above. From this, I was able to come up with the equations that will be able to define the system of this model and try run simulations around this and look at the change over time of the dynamics. So the infection rate here is defined to be affected by the cultural practices, which is at the denominator as the psi c. And we have also the relative infectiousness of those people who are in the infected compartments compared to those who drop out, who are in the D. And also we have part of the male circumcision that is already happening in the region. So whereby we believe that such is a controlling factor that we can measure, while the cultural practices actually propagate the infectiousness of the chances and possibility of transferring the infection to multiple people. So from this, I was able to define, come up with the reproduction number, which represents the average number, how if one person is infected with HIV, how many more people can they infect? So that when we have it at less than 1, then we know that the disease will die out in the population. However, when it comes to greater than 1, that means that the disease will not die out soon. So our aim is to have at least the reproduction number coming to 0 and look at what type of interventions can bring this number down so that such practices, the disease in such regions will die out over time and will not be having new infections being contributed by this region over and over again. So from the preliminary analysis, we found out that part of what we can do to reduce the infection in this particular region, that is to reduce the infection rate, which is represented by beta, to reduce the cultural, look at interventions that can bring about the reduction of the cultural practices or can accommodate such practices in a way that it doesn't affect the transmission dynamics, and also trying to put people on treatment and retaining them, the infectious people on treatment and retaining them on treatment so that they don't drop out and contribute to making the propagation of the disease higher and higher with time. So with this, since the major area was the cultural practices, tried to run a few simulations to look at how the actual results will look at the end of time when the study will be done. And this is the picture that we have varying the cultural practices at different levels, actually seeing that when you look at the infected population, in a place where the cultural practices are very high, we can see that we have an inflection of the number of infected people in that region. And also it takes a lot of time when we look at the virally suppressed population, which is where we want to get everyone at. We want to get everyone who's HIV infected at a place whereby the virus is not detectable in the body. And when you look at how culture also affects that, that means if there is a large proportion of people who are actually practicing these cultural practices in the region, then that means it will even affect the rate at which people are virally suppressed. So, and also when you look at it also affects the dropping out, because when the practices are actually very high, you can see that where we have the 0.6 and how the curve is up there, it also affects that, because some of these people are ostracized in the region and they drop out of care because some of them are told they shouldn't be into care, and the cultural practices, some of them don't even allow them to get into that. So we also see that the susceptible population will reduce very greatly and very fast. The curve goes down very fast when there are these cultural practices that are being practiced in the region. So with that, we can already see how the dynamics play out when cultural factor is put in a place like this, where we have the cultural practices being very dominant, and comparing it to other dynamics of the model, that is the infectiousness of those who are infected, also advocating for the same thing, for them being actually put on treatment so that the dynamics can look better than they are here. So I also tried to vary the transmission rate. So the question might be, why am I looking at these particular parameters? It's because from the analysis, you could see that these are the parameters that were affecting most the transmission dynamics in that region, with cultural practices being one of them. Yet it was still important to also look at the other dynamics that were also affecting the system. So with that, we see that when the cultural practice parameter is set at higher values, let's say like 0.8, then the infection spreads so much through the population. So we can see already that in regions whereby we have the cultural practices being very predominant, then the infection goes high, and it is hard to get people to a place where we want them to be, HIV infected people to a place where we want them to be, that is being virally suppressed. So at the same time, when we have infected individuals who are not yet on treatment, then there's a quicker depletion of those people who are susceptible, and that means more people become infected in this region. So from this, we can already see that there is need for public interventions that are beyond the biological interventions that we already have put in place. That means it is probably very important when we look at a region that has very rich predisposing cultural behaviors which are high risk, then it is very important to look at different interventions. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, such a region has already benefited from other interventions like the voluntary male circumcision and the ART, but the region still reports over time high incidence cases. It contributes to a very large number of new infections, as well as the prevalence has continued to remain high, especially in this region. So yes, I hope that this research will help policymakers in terms of curating interventions that will support and see the elimination of HIV in such a culturally rich region. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Any questions?
Okay, just real quick question. So when you mentioned the interventions has to be cultural sensitive, and then you kind of mentioned, okay, now we should focus on lowering the transmission rate, right? So what exact kinds of cultural interventions are you talking about? Is it just to not allowing widow cleansing altogether, or is something else?
Okay, thank you for the question. Can I answer that first? Okay, so since it's a very culturally rich region and we still have some people who are practicing these risky behaviors, it is hard to come and tell them, stop practicing them. But we can look at motivating factors to that. Let's say like for the women who are being cleansed and inherited, some of the motivating factors to this are poverty, because it is in such a region, women traditionally cannot inherit land. So the only way that they are able to keep the inheritance is if they're inherited, because that goes to a male whether it's a professional cleanser or actually the brother of the deceased. So these are some of the contributing things, because women around this area are vulnerable to that. So part of what I could foresee helping is if these women are empowered and if they find ways that they can actually support and sustain themselves so that they don't find themselves at the mercies of cultural practices. Yes.
Hi, Sally. Thank you very much for such a wonderful presentation. That's a very great talk, and congratulations, well done. My question is in regards to the parameter values. So did you do parameter estimation, or you were able to source that from expert knowledge, or like how did you get your parameter values? Yeah.
Thank you for the question. In terms of the other parameter values, those were inferred from literature. For the cultural practices, I varied at different levels just to see how the dynamics will play out with different levels of the cultural practices. Yes.
Hello? All right. Yeah. Once again, thank you, Sally, for such a nice presentation. So my question goes to a little bit away from the math, but rather into maybe the social behavior of the community in the Nyanza region. So how is HIV perceived in that community? Is it openly discussed, or it's something that's protected? So for example, if someone dies of the HIV, is the inheritor or the widow becomes aware of that situation? And if they do become aware of the situation, do they proceed into engaging into the inheritance, besides that they become aware of the knowledge that this someone already has the HIV?
Okay, thank you. I think with regards to that, especially in the very remote areas of the region, women are not well empowered. That means even, let's say in the context of now a married woman with a husband, these are not open conversations that they can have with their spouse. So that if the man was HIV positive, this is not a conversation that they'll bring with their wives. And this is not a conversation that the wives are able to bring to ask and question with their husbands, because they are pressed down. So it's not an open discussion in especially the very remote areas of the region. Yeah.
Sally, thanks so much for the presentation. So I'm listening to part of your work, and I come from the same region, and there's a lot of shift that has happened. And part of my PhD work was to also study the same with TB. And that was between 2012 up to 2018. And there's a lot of shift also in the hotspot. So you want to take note of that, because in 2003, at the climax of it, and that's like two decades back, there was a lot of intervention that came into place to make the women knowledgeable and self-aware of what they opt into. And so what the shift is now is that I am not culturally inclined to being inherited or the cleansing. That stopped. It's more like I opt into it. Because the women are more knowledgeable and self-aware of themselves, and they know when they're getting into particular practices, and they make the decision to do that. And so you want to be careful enough to capture the socio-cultural aspects. Otherwise, you'll overlook it and you'll be speaking to what has already been sorted. What we are worried of now is not just the shift into opting in, but the massive shift into the age. So you want to also disaggregate and take into account the age parameter, because we're seeing lots of youths now between the age of 18 and 28. And not just in Nyanza, it's cutting across that band from Nyanza all the way up to coast. You can refer to a few of the articles, part of the spatiotemporal work that I did. You'll notice it's all red. In fact, Nairobi is the hotspot. So you want to think around that, and probably if you want to really put a lot of emphasis on the cultural aspects on women, then comparatively, you want to understand how does Nyanza compare with the others, looking at the investment that has happened, because a lot has taken place, and women who opt into these cultural practices, who are into it, they opt into it. Yeah.
Oh,
That's just a comment. Thank you.
Well, thank you also so much. I think that will also be a great aspect to incorporate there.
Thank you. Thank you for all your questions.